Number 20. Fried cornbread and sorghum. Not baked cornbread, fried cornbread. The distinction matters. You mix 2 cups of cornmeal with a pinch of salt and enough boiling water to make a stiff dough, shaped it into small flat rounds the size of your palm, and fried them in a skillet with a thin film of bacon grease until they blistered and browned on both sides. The outside crackled when you bit through it. The inside steamed and yielded. With a drizzle of sorghum syrup, darker and more complex than molasses, slightly tangy, made from sorghum cane, this was a breakfast that asked almost nothing of the cook and gave back considerably more than it cost. Appalachian families made it through entire winters on this combination. The cornmeal was usually bought in 25-pound bags. The sorghum came in gallon jugs. Both lasted for months. Number 19. Oatmeal with salt pork drippings. This is not the oatmeal of modern wellness culture with its almond milk and blueberries and $12 price tag at a cafe counter. This is the original, which is considerably better if you have any interest in actually being full until noon. You cooked rolled oats the slow way, not 1 minute in a microwave, but 15 minutes in a pot of salted water, stirring occasionally until they turned dense and almost creamy. Then you added a spoonful of the drippings left in the pan after you had fried salt pork the morning before. The fat enriched the oats, gave them savory depth, and provided calories that stuck. Salt pork was the cheapest cured pork product available through most of American history, often under $1 a pound, and its drippings kept in a jar on the stove for a week. Scottish immigrants knew this combination as porridge with dripping. Welsh miners knew it as the breakfast that got you through a shift underground. Americans on the frontier knew it as Tuesday. Number 18. Egg in a nest. 1 egg, 1 piece of bread, 1 pan, a minute of standing. You cut or tore a hole in the center of a slice of bread, placed the bread flat in a buttered skillet, cracked the egg into the hole, and cooked it until the white set and the yolk was still soft. The bread toasted from the pan, the egg cooked into the bread. The result was exactly 1 serving of protein and carbohydrate, unified, warm, and better than either thing eaten separately. In Appalachia, this was called a toad in a hole. In New England, a one-eyed jack. In Jewish households, it appeared as egg in a frame and varied by what fat was in the pan. Eggs were the last protein most poor families gave up during hard times because a backyard chicken required only feed scraps to produce 1 egg per day. For a senior on a fixed income today, eggs remain among the most economical sources of complete protein available. Number 17. Potato pancakes. Leftover boiled potatoes were rarely wasted in any household that understood scarcity. You grated cold potatoes on a box grater, squeezed out the excess water in a clean rag, mixed in a beaten egg and a pinch of salt, and fried them in thin rounds in a hot skillet. They crisped on the outside and stayed soft inside and took about 3 minutes per side. A single large potato made enough pancakes for 1 person's breakfast. Jewish grandmothers called them latkes and made them with onion. German farm wives called them kartoffelpuffer and served them with applesauce. Polish families in Chicago's South Side called them plaki ziemniaczane and made them every Sunday. They all understood that a cold cooked potato from last night's supper, run across a grater and dropped into a hot pan, was not a leftover problem. It was the next morning's solution. Number 16. Salt pork and gravy on biscuits. This was the construction workers' breakfast of the American South, and it was built to hold you. You fried thick slices of salt pork until rendered and browned, then lifted them out of the pan and sprinkled 2 tablespoons of flour into the drippings, whisking until it turned light brown. Milk went in, enough to make a thin gravy, and the whole thing cooked over medium heat until it thickened into something pourable. The salt pork went back in. You spooned it over split biscuits baked in a 450-degree oven from a dough of 2 cups flour, a tablespoon of lard or shortening, and enough buttermilk to bring it together. This was a complete caloric event. Miners in West Virginia ate it, farmhands in Georgia ate it, loggers in the Pacific Northwest ate it. It was not a gentle breakfast. It was a meal designed for people about to work very hard in cold weather, and it succeeded completely at that task. Number 15, fried apples. In late autumn and winter, when apples were plentiful and cheap, this was breakfast in the Appalachians and the Ozarks for generations. You cored the apples but did not peel them, sliced them into half-inch rings, and fried them in a cast-iron skillet with a small amount of butter or lard, a spoonful of brown sugar if you had it, and a dusting of cinnamon. They cooked down in about 10 minutes into something caramelized, slightly jammy, warm, and intensely flavored. Served alongside a piece of cornbread or a biscuit, they made a breakfast that felt like abundance even when the pantry was thin. Church of the Brethren families in Virginia made fried apples every Sunday. They appear in 19th century American cookbooks under the name stewed apples or pan apples. With a simplicity that suggests no explanation was necessary, every reader already knew. Number 14, grits with red-eye gravy. Grits are ground hominy, dried corn that has been treated with an alkaline solution to remove the hull, then dried again and ground. The process, called nixtamalization, was invented by indigenous peoples of Mesoamerica over 3,000 years ago and makes the niacin in corn biologically available in a way that untreated corn is not. Populations that depended on corn without nixtamalizing it developed pellagra, a niacin deficiency. Populations that nixtamalized it did not. This is history embedded in a breakfast food. You cook the grits low and slow in salted water until thick, stirred in butter, and serve them alongside red-eye gravy. The pan drippings from fried country ham deglazed with a splash of black coffee, which turned the drippings into a thin, dark, bitter-edged sauce that was poured over everything. The coffee cut the fat, the salt cut the bitterness. The whole plate cost pennies and kept a person grounded. Number 13, cracklin cornbread. Cracklins, the crisp, brown pieces of skin and fat left after rendering lard from pork, were folded into cornbread batter across the rural South for at least 200 years. You made a standard cornmeal batter, 2 cups cornmeal, 1 egg, a cup of buttermilk, a teaspoon of baking soda, salt. Then you folded in a handful of cracklins, poured into a screaming hot cast-iron skillet greased with the last of the lard, and baked at 425 for 20 minutes. The cornbread emerged golden on the outside, richly flavored within, with pockets of crisped pork scattered through every slice. For breakfast, it was eaten hot from the pan with nothing else required. Nothing in it was wasted. The lard was a byproduct of butchering. The cracklins were a byproduct of rendering the lard. The cornmeal was the cheapest grain in the store. 3 byproducts of 3 processes produced something genuinely excellent. Number 12, sourdough pancakes. Before commercial baking powder, before dry yeast in envelopes, before any of the conveniences that modern baking takes for granted, frontier households and Alaskan prospectors kept a sourdough starter, a live culture of wild yeast and bacteria fed with flour and water, alive in a crock on the counter or tucked in a bedroll for warmth in winter. Every morning you ladled some of the starter into a bowl, added an egg, a bit of oil or lard, a pinch of salt, and fried the batter in a skillet into pancakes that were tangier and more complex than anything made with baking powder. The starter was replenished each day. It never ran out. Some Alaskan families kept their starters for decades. Old-timers were called sourdoughs, not as a culinary description, but as the highest practical compliment. A person who knew how to keep something alive in harsh conditions and turn it into something good. Number 11, poke salad and eggs. Poke is a native North American plant, Phytolacca americana, that grows wild across the eastern United States and has been eaten by indigenous peoples and rural Americans for centuries. The young spring leaves, boiled twice in separate water to remove the water-soluble toxins present in the mature plant, were then drained, wilted in a pan with a small amount of fat, and scrambled with eggs. The result tasted like a strongly flavored green, similar to spinach but earthier, with a bitterness that the fat and eggs softened. Tony Joe White wrote a song about it in 1968. What the song captured, beyond the surface, was the way that poor Southerners had always known which things in the woods and ditches and creek banks could be turned into food. That knowledge was not romantic. It was practical. It was the difference between eating and not eating in the months before garden vegetables came in. Number 10. Fried salt herring and potatoes. In coastal New England and in Scandinavian immigrant communities across the upper Midwest, salt herring was among the cheapest proteins available throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. You soak the dried salted herring overnight in fresh water to pull out the excess salt, then fried it in a pan with boiled sliced potatoes and onion. The herring crisped at the edges, the potatoes browned, the onion sweetened. The whole thing smelled deeply of the sea and tasted of something ancient and satisfying. Norwegian families in Minnesota made this on Friday mornings. Finnish settlers in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan made it through January. It was inexpensive, it required no refrigeration before soaking, and the omega-3 fatty acids in the herring, though nobody called them that then, kept the hearts of fish-eating populations quietly healthier than those of their beef-eating neighbors. Number 9. Bean and egg scramble. Leftover beans, pinto, black, or navy, were never wasted in a household that had learned to think in terms of the whole week. You heated a spoonful of lard or bacon grease in a skillet, added the cold beans with their cooking liquid, mashed them roughly with a fork as they warmed, then cracked 2 eggs over the top and scrambled everything together until the eggs set. The beans provided protein, fiber, and iron. The eggs provided protein and fat. The whole thing took 6 minutes and cost less than 50 cents. Mexican-American families along the border have made variations of this for generations. It appears in Tex-Mex cooking as huevos con frijoles, without the precise bean scramble technique, but with the same underlying logic. In poor Anglo farmhouses across Texas and Oklahoma, it appeared without a name. It was just breakfast. What the beans were left over from did not matter. What mattered was that nothing was wasted. Number 8. Tomato gravy on biscuits. Not red-eye gravy, not cream gravy, tomato gravy, which has largely disappeared from American tables and should not have. You made a light roux in a skillet, a tablespoon of butter and a tablespoon of flour, cooked together until pale gold. Then a can of crushed tomatoes went in, thinned with a little water, seasoned with salt and pepper, and simmered until it thickened into something pourable and bright. Ladled over split biscuits, it was a complete breakfast without a single animal protein, which mattered enormously on the days when the eggs were already spoken for, the bacon was gone, and the milk was running low. Ozark farm families made this through the Depression. It appears in community cookbooks from Missouri, Arkansas, and Tennessee printed in the 1940s, with the quiet confidence of a recipe no one needed explained. The acid from the tomatoes made it bright. The flour made it substantial. The butter made it feel like care. Number 7. Millet porridge. Americans largely forgot millet after World War II, when corn and wheat consolidated their grip on the American diet. But millet was a staple grain of the American frontier, particularly in the dryland farming regions of Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas, where it was more drought-tolerant than corn. You cooked it exactly like oatmeal. 1 cup of dry millet toasted briefly in a dry pot, then simmered in 2½ cups of water for 20 minutes until soft and slightly sticky. It had a mild sweetness, a faint nuttiness, and a texture more delicate than oatmeal. With butter and a spoon of honey, it was excellent. With salt and a fried egg alongside, it was a complete meal. Millet is gluten-free, higher in protein than rice, and one of the most affordable grains per pound available in any grocery store. African grandmothers in countries where millet never left the table never needed to rediscover it. American grandmothers mostly did. Number 6. Fried bread. There are dozens of versions of fried bread across American poverty cooking, and every tradition arrived at approximately the same thing. Dough made from flour, water, salt, and a leavening agent, or no leavening at all, stretched or patted thin and fried in hot fat until puffed and golden. Navajo fry bread is the most widely known American version, developed in the 1860s under the duress of forced relocation to Bosque Redondo, where the government issued flour, lard, salt, and baking powder as rations to a people whose food system had been deliberately destroyed. What was made from those rations became cultural and survived. Appalachian grease bread was made from cornmeal dough fried in pork fat. Midwest soda bread was made from flour and baking soda fried in a dry pan. Every version said the same thing: you can make something good from almost nothing, and the knowledge of how to do that belongs to you permanently once you learn it. Number 5. Johnny cakes. The Johnny cake is arguably the oldest continuously made American breakfast food, still recognizable in its original form. Ground cornmeal, salt, boiling water, and a hot greased griddle. That was the entire recipe in 1600s New England, and the recipe has not fundamentally changed in 400 years. Indigenous peoples ground the corn. Colonists learned the technique and the ingredient from them and called the result journey cake, which became Johnny cake over time. You mixed 1 cup of white cornmeal with half a teaspoon of salt, poured in enough boiling water to make a thick batter that spread slowly, and dropped it by spoonfuls onto a well-greased griddle or skillet, 2 to 3 minutes per side until firm. They were thicker than pancakes, crispier at the edges, with a faintly sweet corn flavor that needed nothing added, though butter helped and maple syrup helped more. Rhode Island Johnny cakes made from a specific, finely ground white cornmeal called flint corn have protected status as a regional tradition. The recipe is 400 years old and costs 40 cents to make. Number 4. Congee. Every culture that has ever eaten rice has a version of congee. Rice cooked low and slow in a large quantity of water until the grains break down into a thick, silky, almost porridge-like consistency. In China, it is juk. In Japan, okayu. In Korea, juk. In the Philippines, arroz caldo. In poor communities across Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Africa, this is the breakfast that stretches 1 cup of leftover rice into a warm, gentle, filling meal for a sick day or a lean one. You simmered the rice in 4 to 5 times its volume of water or broth for 30 to 40 minutes, stirring occasionally until it lost all structural integrity and became something unified and smooth. A soft-boiled egg dropped in, a drizzle of soy sauce, a slice of ginger, those were garnishes. The congee itself was the meal, and it was nourishing in a way that was almost medicinal, easy to digest, hydrating, warming, and filling. For seniors with digestive concerns, dental problems, or reduced appetite, it was not just acceptable, it was ideal. Number 3. Milk toast. This was the breakfast you made when someone was sick, when the stomach was unsettled, when grief had killed the appetite, when age had narrowed the list of things that still went down easily. You buttered a piece of toast, placed it in a bowl, and poured warm, whole milk, salted very slightly, over it. That was the whole thing. It seemed almost too simple to be food, which was perhaps the point. The toast softened without dissolving entirely. The milk was warm without being hot. The salt cut the flatness. The butter gave it a small amount of fat that made it satisfying. American mothers made milk toast for children with fevers for at least 2 centuries. English families called it sop. In the American Northeast, in the early 20th century, It appeared on hospital menus as a first food after surgery. It asked nothing of the person eating it. No chewing, no heat tolerance, no effort. It simply was. For a senior who had given up on breakfast because everything seemed like too much work, milk toast was the bridge back to eating. Number 2, sweet potato and egg hash. 1 sweet potato, 2 eggs, a skillet in 20 minutes. You cube the sweet potatoes small, half-inch pieces, and fry them in a small amount of fat over medium heat for about 12 minutes, covered until soft inside and beginning to caramelize at the edges. Then you push them to one side, crack the eggs directly into the pan, and scrambled everything together, letting the egg coat the potato pieces, turning the whole thing golden and slightly crisp. Sweet potatoes were the survival crop of the American South for 300 years. They grew in poor soil, required minimal care, stored for months in a cool cellar, and were nutritionally extraordinary. Dense in beta-carotene, vitamin C, potassium, and fiber. For a senior managing blood pressure or blood sugar, the fiber and potassium in a daily sweet potato were not incidental benefits. They were significant ones. Enslaved people in the antebellum South grew and ate sweet potatoes as a primary food. Freed people in the years after the Civil War grew them in kitchen gardens that were sometimes the only reliable food source they had. The sweet potato fed people through every American catastrophe and asked for nothing back. Number 1, oatmeal with bacon grease and brown sugar. This is the breakfast a retired school teacher in Western Kentucky ate every single morning for 40 years after her husband died. Her daughter described it at a church potluck in 2003, and 3 other women at the table immediately said their mothers had eaten the same thing. Slow-cooked rolled oats, not instant, never instant, in salted water until thick. A small spoonful of bacon grease stirred in from the jar on the back of the stove. A level teaspoon of brown sugar. Nothing else. The bacon grease sounds wrong until you try it, and then it sounds exactly right. The salt and smoke of the fat worked against the sweetness of the sugar and the earthiness of the oats to make something that tasted more complex than its 3 components had any right to produce. It cost less than 15 cents a bowl in 1980, and not much more than that today. It took 12 minutes to make. It kept you full until 1 in the afternoon. That school teacher lived to 93. Her blood pressure was fine. Her doctor said she had the cholesterol profile of a 50-year-old. She never took a supplement in her life. She ate oatmeal every morning. She sat down at the table to eat it. She ate it slow. These breakfasts are not nostalgia. They are solutions. The conditions that produce them, fixed incomes, thin pantries, cooking alone, the long morning of a day you have to get through, did not disappear. They are present right now in millions of American kitchens. Make one of them tomorrow. Set a place at the table. Sit down. Eat slow. That is still an act of dignity.